Serenity Now is that was one of the great classic Seinfeld shows from a million years ago, and in various ways, whether consciously or not, we all seek to calm down, to seek some serenity, to seek some peace. Meditation is one of the great things that people do to find peace. Even if people don't say, my life and my brain is so ragged at the edges, there's so many voices, there's so many thoughts, there's so much anxiety, I need to do meditation. But anyone who does meditation is clearly seeking peace, and lots of people in our city are trying it. I remember going to a course once in meditation at Sydney University. They said there is nothing religious about the course, it's just a physical exercise. I don't believe the person who ran the course was lying. I just think they had no idea how full of Hindu speak they were. It was full of Hindu conversation. But I think the person was so ignorant of world religions, they just didn't know what they just thought these are just anchorless, free topics of physicality. But meditation can be approached just for its physical benefits, although it has a very obvious set of roots. I've got a number of Christian friends who are professors and nurses in the area of pain management, and they use a certain sort of meditation. The Bible speaks of meditation quite differently to the way that our culture thinks about it. Some people don't use meditation, they use medication, and sometimes it's diagnosed rightly through a doctor for a time. The use of alcohol for many people is that, it's a self-medication. Other sorts of drugs is a way of dealing with our pressure and our lack of internal peace. Mediation, workplace, families, all sorts of things. There's a lack of peace all over the place. The United Nations, of course, many people think it's been a great failure. I've tended to think it was a failure. But then my son-in-law, he's an academic in this area, he says, oh, no, it's fundamentally a great success. I said, well, tell me about it, I've never heard that before. He said, well, the great purpose of the UN was to stop another world war. I thought it was about stopping skirmishes. He said, no, it's fundamentally to stop the great powers beating each other up and killing zillions again. So he said at that level it's been a success. But I've got a man I'm honoured to call a friend. It's a Somo from the Congo, and he said when the UN arrived there, they were so relieved, but they discovered that what happened when the soldiers heard that a raid was coming, they would move out of the village and they would come back then to count the bodies. And I know the people in the Congo were deeply disappointed. They had these great hopes that the UN would bring peace. But actually the UN was the great sort of canary in the mine of when to leave. When the soldiers left, the civilians knew it was time to flee anywhere to escape. Much that we put our hopes in works for a short time, starts off with good advertising, but has trouble delivering. Now, why is it that humans are constantly concerned about peace? They were in the Bible. Most religions will make some claim to bring peace, either internally, serenity, or externally. They're obvious enemies of peace, and they're fat, the enemies of peace. That is, fear is one of the great enemies. Fear is different to anxiety in that fear is generally spoken of as having a specific focus. Angst, the A in fat, anxiety is normally spoken of as a sense of threat which has no specific focus. It's just a general sense of foreboding, a general sense that even though things are terrific now and things are going well now, it could go wrong in 1,000 different ways, whereas fear's got a focus. It's a specific thing. And then, of course, terror is fear on steroids. That's the facing down the gun, when the smoke starts coming from the plane engine, where you're not just a little fearful, you're terrified. And human life has always been like that. Even though life now is so much safer than it was in the time of Jesus, or the time of King David, who we're going to look at a bit of his writing soon. Our life is so much safer then. It's still a life that's plagued by fears and a longing for peace. Because human life has always been three things. It's been difficult from the very beginning, will be till the time you die. It's dangerous. There's always sorts of threats, psychological threats, emotional threats, physical threats. And of course it's ultimately deadly, which is a cause of some angst for most of us. And I'm amused sometimes when I've met people who've said to me quite seriously, when they've heard some of the Bible statements about trust and the access to peace that Christians do enjoy in their relationship with God in Christ. They say, oh, well, it was easy back then. I don't know how to say this without being rude. That's just pig ignorance. It is much harder to find peace back then than it is now. Life was much more dangerous back then than it is now. And yet it is still a struggle for us to enjoy peace in spite of all our military hardware and all the things set up for it. So let's have a look at this Psalm 23. In the midst of what is an anxious life, this is probably the favourite part of the Bible for many people, and for good reason. Some people assume this Psalm 23, is tied up with death. It's not. It's much more about life than death, but it's also appropriate near death or at a funeral. Psalm 23. Into this angsty, fear-laden world, this psalm comes with just a remarkable exuding of confidence and peace and well-being in a life that is constantly disturbing and troubling. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Now, some of you might break into song if you went to a private school at this point, about the Lord being my shepherd. As you can see, the writer writes this song with a graphic image in his mind that he is like a sheep. Now, I wonder if we've got any sheep. We've got any sheep here? There's a sheep. Very impressive characters. I often like to think of myself as a sheep. You'll notice they've got the eyes on the side of their head, which means they're scaredy-cat animals. Animals with eyes on the side means that they're frightened of being attacked. Animals like us with our eyes in the front means we're hunters. That's why horses fear dogs, because they can tell just by the way dogs are made that they're hunters. People sometimes go on with very little thought about how the Bible's got an arrogant view of man, as if we're somehow important in the universe, which we are, like it or not. But then they also don't like the other things the Bible says about us, that you are like a mist, very substantial. And I hate being described like a sheep, frankly. I think they're particularly disgusting. I'd rather be compared to a duck. You know, they can fly and they can swim on the water and under the water. They can do all sorts of stuff. These things are just great on a plate. And in the time, in the place where the Bible was written, there were bears, wolves and lions and thieves all keen on a lamb chop. And a sheep on its own is an endangered sheep. A sheep on its own is nearly dead. A sheep without a shepherd in that country, unlike Australia, which is remarkably free of predators, well, not in the business sense, but in the sense of, animal, wildlife things. But a sheep on its own is a nearly dead sheep. And so it's a very pathetic image. Sheep are stupid animals. I have an argument with a vet friend of mine who says, no, they're not stupid. I'm not persuaded. He says, what they have trouble is knowing who to trust. So you may have read in the Sydney Morning Herald a few weeks ago of hundreds and hundreds of sheep, the whole wealth of a whole village, that ran over a hill, over a cliff. I thought only lemmings did that. But if you can get one sheep to run over a cliff, the other geniuses will follow it. Now, thankfully, after the first few hundred died, this bottom was sort of squudgy, and the last few hundred sheep of this poor village didn't die. They got a nasty shock. Whole herds of sheep can be startled to run in any direction by a bunny rabbit. I mean, we're talking serious patheticness, and yet the Bible insists on saying, I am like a sheep. Vulnerable, weak, endangered. But the guy who writes this, interestingly, I've got a portrait of him here for you, is King David. We weren't sure whether to show you the full frontal nudity, but we thought that might distract you, beautiful though it is. But see, King David is anything but a wimp. He is anything but the sort of guy who needs a psychological crutch, therefore makes up an invisible friend. King David was an alpha male of the warrior type. As a youngish man, looking after his father's flocks, we know from the records that he had fought and beaten a bear and killed a lion. Not bad for a wimp. And yet he writes this thing with himself being the sheep, as a good picture of the fragility and the angst of human life. A magnificent man fought a huge giant in Goliath and beat him that had frightened a whole army. An experienced man, a man who went through lots of pain. His first wife died. One of his first children died. Later in life, one of his daughters was raped. And later on, one of his sons was murdered. This is a man who knows the tough end of life. For many years, there were death squads chasing him, both as a young man, then again as an old man. And he himself led many battles, both small skirmishes and huge massed formations. This is an impressive dude, David. And yet he writes this psalm where he says, look at it, it's beautiful and it's full of peace. And I want to follow with you the logic, because there's a logic to this piece. The Lord is my shepherd. It's the fundamental statement. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is one happy, boasting sheep. He's saying, I'm doing real good because I've got a fantastic shepherd. Then, for the next two verses, he speaks directly to God the shepherd. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Why not? For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Lastly again, confidently boasting of his life and his shepherd. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is a man who has discovered the great secret to peace. The great, substantial, resilient peace. It's a peace which by accident, and not by searching for it, I've discovered as a Christian. To be able to go through enormous ups and downs with a great sense of it's okay. This isn't what I wanted, it isn't what I planned. In fact, it's the opposite of what I wanted, but it's okay because my shepherd is with me. He's not forgotten me. Like King David, well, I don't want to put myself in such august company, but I didn't become a Christian because I wanted peace. I was kind of too young to even worry about peace, I think. It was just true, and I've discovered as a massive fringe benefit, there is this whole steadfastness and steadiness that you get in the relationship with the living and the true God. Well, let's have a look at how it works, because this is not a technique. What most things will offer you is either medication or a technique, unrelated to people, unrelated to personalities. This is actually, well, the substance is in the first 5 words. See, the great secret of peace, according to Jesus, because he speaks about peace very similarly to this, is a person that you're in relationship with. It's that relationship that engenders and spreads peace. The better you know this person and their relationship with you, the more you will enjoy the fruit of peace. The Lord is my shepherd. Logically, therefore, I shall not want. If you know and can say and understand those words, the Lord is my shepherd, you've discovered the beginnings of the secret to peace. Now, you still need to do what the Bible says and apply that, which we'll come back to in a few seconds. But it's that relationship which lies at the very heart of it. The Lord is my shepherd. To be able to say, I am like a sheep. I am weak. I am vulnerable. Valuable. Sheep are valuable things, not just to be eaten, but people did try and steal them back then. If you had 100 sheep, you had a huge flock. 10 sheep was a reasonable flock. So they're valuable, but they're vulnerable. So David is able to say, God is my shepherd. Be quiet. I thought the phone was dead. I thought Vodafone had turned me off, but no. Just when you don't want it to ring, it rings. You've got him speaking to God as sheep to shepherd, a relationship that he knows. And you've got underneath it in John 10, where Jesus very cheekily says, you know the Lord Yahweh, the great God of the Old Testament, who's the shepherd? Listen to what Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. And this has just got blasphemy or divinity written all over it. Where Jesus calmly says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life. They shall never perish, and no one can snatch them out of my hand. To be in that sort of relationship where you say, I belong to Jesus. He is my shepherd, and he belongs to me. He is my king. He is my guide. He is my doctor. He is my dietitian. All those things that a shepherd is to the sheep. That's the sort of relationship. It puts us down. It puts us in a position of obedience and trust of someone greater. But it elevates us enormously and produces a life full of peace because of the shepherd. So it's a bit like it's all like a bridge that's held up by one great big mighty pylon. And there are great bridges like that. One huge pylon that works out from that logically. So let's see how the logic works out. Once you're able to say and you understand that the Lord is my shepherd, I am his and he is mine, Jesus is the Good Shepherd, there are three great sort of conclusions that come from it. The first is in the first verse. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Or literally, I shall never have any need. I shall lack nothing. He's so confident in his shepherd that he knows that all his needs will be met. One of the reasons why God is so consistently hostile to covetousness is it turns your wants into needs. As they say, there, little luxury, don't you cry. You'll be a necessity by and by. Right? And what God promises always is to meet your needs and more. But we often confuse the two. He's able to say here, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. All of our needs will be met. That's why he's able to say, he makes me lie down in green pastures. You may think, now, have I ever seen a sheep lying down? Probably if you live in the country, you might have. There are a number of interesting books written by shepherds about this psalm. And they mention that particularly the Middle Eastern sheep need 4 things to be in order for them to lie down. They just won't lie down if any one of these 4 things isn't going right for them. The first is they need to be full of food. They need to have plenty of feed. The second is they need to be fear-free. If there's the sound or the smell of wild dogs, anything out of the ordinary, large bunny rabbits, anything that can frighten them, they will not lie down. They're not like dogs. You tell them what to do. They're stupid. They've got to be friction-free. There's apparently this thing, like there is in your office, a butting order. It's very clear which sheep is in which order. And if there's any doubt about the order in the bunch of sheep, none of the sheep will lie down. There's got to be all the relationships have got to be in order. If there's any friction, they won't lie down. And lastly, any flies. Apparently there's a particular sort of fly that used to lays its eggs in the nose of the sheep. And the shepherds in the Middle East still have this oil that's normally made of olive oil and sulphur and a few spices, which the shepherds rub on the nose of the sheep that kills the larvae of these horrible flies that really, they don't do the sheep any permanent damage, but they're irritating. Won't lie down with an itchy nose. But this is a perfectly content sheep. This is a kind of a sheep almost in paradise. He lies down in green pastures. So he's amply fed. Actually, you've got to be careful with the sheep. They don't overfeed. They can eat themselves to death. They're geniuses. But with the shepherd there, he can lie down in green pastures. Beside quiet water, sheep get very edgy if the river's too exciting. They don't like rapids. It's got to be quiet waters. And this sheep is completely content. Why? Because of his shepherd. And one of the things I'm sure, if you've got friends who are Christians, they can tell you is stories where they've discovered the way in which God provides for all our needs. I've got a whole series of stories here. I won't bore you with them. Just where I found all sorts of needs being met semi-miraculously in the timing. It's quite wonderful. God will meet our needs. He promises. He's the Good Shepherd. All our needs will be met, whether it's financial, family, friendship, dealing with our foes. Our needs will be met because our Good Shepherd can be trusted. Now, just to add to the realism of this, verse 4. And here he begins to speak not about the shepherd. He's not bragging to the other sheep at the local sheep hotel. Now he's speaking to the shepherd, because now he's talking out real fear. Verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now see, what I want the Bible to say, and what some people foolishly think it says, I did for many years, that because God loves me, because I have this good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, which is kind of crazy, but that's what God does, who loves us so much that he'll die for us, there should be no valley of the shadow of death. That because I've got a good shepherd, he'll make sure I never go through the valley of the shadow of death. I'll never have to go through hardship and hard times. I'll never have to go through the fire. That's exactly what the Bible doesn't say. See, for a sheep, one of the worst things they can go through is a valley of shadows, because every shadow is a wolf or a lion or a bear or a guy with a 303. See? So they hate shadows. They only relax when they're kind of in the clear, when they can see around them. That's why they've got the eyes on both sides. They want to be able to see what's going to kill them. There's not much they can do about it, but they want to be able to see it. And so the thing that sheep hate doing is going through dark places of shadows. But he doesn't say, the Lord is my shepherd. I never go through a shadow. No. He says, God will take him through the valley of the shadow of death. the most frightening and the symbol of all things destructive. So I'm sure many of us have gone through the valley of the shadow of death, where you've had the cancer scare or the heart scare, or you've actually nursed a loved person through death, and you feel, I've been in the shadow of the valley of the shadow of death. Or it may have just been the death of all your hopes and dreams. Everything you thought would happen, all the good stuff that was supposed to happen according to your script didn't. And what the Bible never says is, you got such a good shepherd, it'll never happen. In fact, you're promised it will happen. In a similar passage in Isaiah 43, one of my favourite passages in the Bible, it says, do not fear, I have redeemed you, I've summoned you by name, you're mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you'll not be burnt. You see, I want the Bible to say, you won't have to wade your way through powerful rivers. You won't have to walk through the fires. But God never says that. He says, when you do it, because you will, it won't ultimately hurt you. You think it might. You think it must. But with this good shepherd, it won't. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, David says. For you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. A couple of years ago, I went through, the most horrible set of circumstances. Just almost everything, it seemed to me, that could go wrong did go wrong. In fact, I thought it would have been easier to just got cancer and die. It was one of those things where, and then it didn't stop. Just think, this happened and this happened and this happened. It was just a nightmare. But I knew all the way along, it's okay ultimately. This is hurting, I'm crying a lot, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm confused, but I'm okay. The shepherd is with me. This is what he promised. And I guess I'll go through worse years. I mean, I think that's what life's like. Right? Life's tough, full of difficulties. I remember watching, one time I was having lunch in the holidays, and I was watching, for my education, Darren Hinch. And he had this woman on who was being interviewed. And she'd been a comfort woman, one of those women that during the Second World War, the Imperial Japanese Army had taken women from various countries and made them sex slaves, euphemistically called comfort women. And this woman, a group of Korean women were trying to get action and an apology and money. And this woman, an Australian woman called Jan Ruff O'Hare, had gone public because she said, my feeling is that the world's not taking this seriously because these are Asian women. Maybe if a few Anglos come out as well, maybe various governments will take it more seriously. So she talked about her experience as a young girl in Indonesia and her sister. Sounded like an utter nightmare, being turned into a prostitute. Well, no one even getting paid, it was horrible. But as I watched her on the television, she was luminous. There was something beautiful about her. Not particularly her looks, but there was just something extraordinary. She was unbitter. She was not seeking any money herself or an apology. And I'm thinking to myself, this will reveal to you my bigotry. I said, she has to be a Christian. She has to know Jesus to be able to cope with this like that. To actually be one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen on television. And just when the interview is coming to an end, she said to Darren, can I just say one more thing? And he was just amazed by her. He said, sure. He said, Darren, I just want you and your listeners to know I couldn't have got through all that and all the recovery without Jesus. Without knowing that Jesus was there with me during it and Jesus being there with me afterwards to recover. I couldn't have done it without him. Darren, always comfortable with areas about Jesus, goes, yes, women always suffer worst in warfare, which I think is probably not even true actually, but he just had nothing to say, but she did. Because she's gone through the valley of the shadow of death, but she went through it with the shepherd, and she's able to say, I'll fear no evil. The last affirmation he makes from this one great central pillar, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'll fear no evil. The last one is in the last verse. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Look at that confidence about the ultimate questions. See, a lot of you learn to meditate and stuff, and that will help. That does help, soothes, it does all sorts of physical good, etc., if you can discipline yourself in that way. But it won't deal with the ultimate questions. It won't deal with your sin from the past that will affect you on Judgment Day. It won't deal with the question of where you'll spend eternity. But David, because he has the Good Shepherd, can look at the present blessings, the present difficulties, and the future big question of where will I be with eternity, and know that he shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Why? Because he has a good shepherd who's laid down his life for the sheep. He is okay. He can look at this large question fearlessly and with courage, and like an adult should. Well, serenity now is the cry, and it is great fun to cry it out and to do whatever you want to, like Kramer did. But it all hangs really on this question of, can you honestly say, the Lord is my shepherd? There is not a hint of Christian peace, God-given peace, for anyone who will not embrace Jesus as the Prince of Peace, which he's called in the Scriptures. If you won't call him my shepherd, my king, you will not enjoy his peace. Well, you might construct a mental picture of the universe that might make you feel better for a moment, but it won't be the deep shalom and healing that comes from him. I remember reading a story about a man his father told who'd been a pastor in some part of the UK, and there was a young boy dying in and out of consciousness. Parents, Christians, concerned that their child, they weren't sure if the child was Christian and ready to die. When he died, the minister came back, he'd had a few conversations, and they talked for a while, and they said, look, we've got a question. When he died, we found him like this, holding his ring finger, although he was only a child. And the man, Reverend Anderson, was able to explain to them that he had explained to this kid about the Lord is my shepherd, and about he will look after you through the valley of the shadow of death, and he shall receive you into his dwelling forever. The question said, and he went like, can you say my shepherd? And that's what constructs the pylon. That's where it begins, the capacity to say, the Lord is my shepherd. If we're not at the point yet of saying my shepherd, I'm his sheep, then all this is just a possible blessing, which is worth stepping into as soon as you can. Called It Is Well With My Soul. It's very kind of old worldly, but it's magnificent. And in the chorus, the blokes go one way and the girls go another, and it's very moving. And it's interesting because as people get older, it's harder and harder for people to sing the song with a dry eye, even if they're alpha males like King David. Because the story that lies behind it is a man with enough suffering from his name to start with Horatio Spafford. But Horatio was a businessman in Chicago. In 1871, he lost everything in a single night through the Great Fire of Chicago. Having nowhere to live, etc., and no great prospects, his wife and 4 daughters were given fares to go across to England, where they had family. And just short of England, the boat that they were on was run over by a larger boat, and his wife sent the famous telegram, saved alone, that all 4 of his daughters had drowned. And so when he came across some time afterwards, having lost everything financially, and much more importantly, lost his 4 daughters, he arrived at the point where they thought the accident had happened, and the captain of the ship he was in slowed the boat down so they could have a momentary pause and prayer. And then Horatio Spafford said he found in himself, although he's not a hymn writer or a poet much, this set of ideas rising, which turned into a song. And I won't read you all 6 verses, though they're tremendous. And it says this. This is the sort of strength and peace you can get in the light of the darkest possible things when we're caught up in that relationship and we know the shepherd. He writes this, and it's a great song to sing. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. And the chorus goes, it is well with my soul. He knew something of both. Great joy when life goes as it should, and times when sorrow like sea billows roll. To know the shepherd, to know that we aren't going to know like sheep don't know much of what's going on and what the big picture is, or why do we have to go through this valley? But we understand the shepherd, the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. And that's where we get resilience. And the Christian life, I think, is a question of just getting to know the shepherd better. And when things run up to panic me and to say, all hope is lost, just to get things back in perspective and see, no, the shepherd is still working out his weird but wonderful purposes. Nothing worse than Good Friday. The best of men gets murdered, but it's followed by Resurrection Sunday. And that's what God does. He does weird stuff in wonderful ways. So I hope you'd That's helpful this week. The Lord is my shepherd. It's the key and the source of all strength. Next week, love.